This is crazy HOA life. The salt bucket was not optional today. The tow driver is waiting on me, and I am saying hook it. Susan waved the tape measure at my driveway edge and yelled that my snow pile was too high and too close to the street, and she would charge me a cleanup fee if I did not move it before she finished counting down. She started at 10. I stood there with my pen gripped too tight, watching wind-driven flurries sting my face and wondering how we got here. The answer was simple. Heritage Ridge HOA turned winter maintenance into performance art, and I was the target. I live in Naples, Florida, which does not get snow. Except this year we did. A freak cold snap dumped 8 inches overnight, then another 6 the next morning. The HOA sent out an emergency snow policy email at 4 in the morning with 17 attachments and a threat that violations would be enforced immediately. I work as an apartment maintenance supervisor. I have seen every kind of complaint. I know when someone is setting a trap. So I saved the email, printed the attachments, and shoveled my driveway exactly according to the rules. I piled the snow on my own property line, 3 feet from the curb, tamped it down, salted the walkway. I even took photos with timestamps. Then I went to work. When I got home that evening, Susan was standing in my driveway with a clipboard, a portable thermal printer, and a smug expression that could crack ice. She said my snow pile violated Section 12 of the emergency standards because it created a sightline hazard for turning vehicles. I asked to see Section 12. She pulled out a folded snow emergency policy sheet and shoved it in my face. The print was tiny, and the page was creased so many times the text was barely readable, but I could make out enough to know she was quoting a clause about commercial properties, not residential driveways. I pointed that out. She said the board interpreted it broadly, and I had until tomorrow morning to move the pile or face a $200 fine. I said I would review the policy and respond in writing. She said writing takes too long and management needs immediate compliance. Then she said something I would hear again and again. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there. She folded the policy sheet with a sharp crease, tucked it into her coat pocket, and walked off, leaving orange cones around my snow pile like a crime scene. That night, I went through the attachments line by line. The emergency policy was 23 pages of contradictory rules about shoveling timelines, pile placement, salt use, walkway width, and ice liability. Buried in the appendix was a carve-out that said the board could authorize third-party snow removal and bill residents for non-compliance. I had a bad feeling. I checked my home insurance policy. Any claim related to HOA disputes could trigger a premium hike or a coverage review. That was my stake. I could not let this spiral into a claim. The next morning, I woke up to find the HOA plow crew had pushed a fresh berm of snow and ice back into my driveway entrance, blocking my car. It was deliberate. The plow had gone up one side of the street and skipped my house on the return pass, then circled back to shove the berm directly in front of my driveway apron. I grabbed my shovel and cleared it. 10 minutes later, Susan showed up with her tape measure, her cones, and her printer. She said the new berm was my responsibility under the policy, and I should have cleared it within 2 hours of the plow pass. I said the plow pass happened at 6 in the morning, and I was asleep. She said ignorance is not an excuse and printed a violation notice on the spot. The printer made a mechanical whine and spat out a slip of thermal paper with my address, the time, and a fee amount. No signature line, no appeal instructions, just a demand. I took the slip and asked who authorized third-party billing. She said the board voted on it in executive session, and the results were confidential. I asked for meeting minutes. She said minutes are available on request, but requests take 14 business days to process. I said I would file a request. She said good luck and walked off, leaving the cones in a new configuration around the mouth of my driveway. That afternoon, I called my friend Jenna, who works in IT and has a talent for verifying metadata and timestamps. I explained the situation and sent her the email, the photos, the printed slip, and a video I had just recorded of the plow berm. She said it sounded like the HOA was building a paper trail to justify a lien. I said that was my fear. She said she would dig into the timestamps on the email attachments and see if anything looked off. Then she said something that stuck with me. If they are this aggressive over snow, they are scared of something. Find out what. I spent the next 2 days gathering evidence. I pulled the HOA covenant documents from the county recorder. I downloaded every group chat post from the Heritage Ridge neighborhood message board for the past month. I found a thread where Susan had posted about me 3 days before the snow even started. She called me a compliance risk and said I had a history of asking too many questions. Someone replied asking what questions. Susan said it did not matter because the board had already flagged my address for prioritized enforcement. Another resident asked if that was legal. Susan said the board had discretion, and discretion meant they could target anyone who made their job harder. That was my smoking gun. I screenshot the thread, saved the metadata, and sent it to Jenna. She confirmed the timestamps were legitimate and unedited. Then she found something else. The email with the snow policy attachments had been sent at 4 in the morning, but the attachments themselves had been created 2 weeks earlier, before the storm was even forecast. Someone had pre-written the rules and sat on them, waiting for an excuse to deploy them. Jenna said that suggested coordination. I said it suggested retaliation. She said maybe both. The next morning, a winter storm watch upgraded to a warning. The forecast called for another 8 inches starting that evening and continuing through the night. I needed to finish my evidence packet now. I printed everything, organized it into a binder, and prepared a formal complaint to the management company that handled Heritage Ridge. Then Susan showed up again, this time with backup. She walked onto my property with 2 other board members and said they were conducting an inspection under the emergency policy. I said they needed to schedule inspections in advance. She said emergencies override normal procedures and pulled out the folded snow emergency policy sheet again, shaking it like it was a warrant. I said I did not consent to an inspection. She said consent was not required and started taking photos of my driveway, my walkway, my snow pile, and my car. One of the other board members filmed the whole thing on a phone. I recognized the setup. They were trying to bait me into a reaction they could use as evidence of hostility. I stepped back, held up my binder, and said I had already filed a formal complaint with the management company and copied the county code enforcement office. Susan stopped mid-photo. She said I had no grounds for a complaint. I said I had screenshots, timestamps, and a metadata trail showing premeditated targeting. She said I was making things up. I said I would let the management company decide. Then I went inside and locked the door. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe because it only gets wilder from here. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was the management company. The rep said they had received my complaint and Susan's counter-complaint, which accused me of trespassing onto HOA common property, verbal harassment, and creating a safety hazard during a declared emergency. I said that was all false, and I had proof. The rep said they would review everything and schedule a hearing, but in the meantime, I needed to comply with all pending notices or risk escalation to legal action. I said the notices were invalid because they violated the covenants and the emergency policy was selectively enforced. The rep said that was for the hearing to decide. I asked when the hearing would be. The rep said they were backlogged due to the storm, and it could be 3 weeks. I said 3 weeks was too long. The rep said they would do their best and hung up. That night the storm hit. Snow came down heavy and fast. By midnight, there was another 10 inches on the ground. I went out at 2 in the morning and shoveled my driveway again, piling the snow in the exact same spot as before, 3 feet from the curb. I took photos every 15 minutes with timestamps. I salted the walkway. I cleared the apron. I did everything right. Then I went to bed. At 6 in the morning, I woke to the sound of a diesel engine idling in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw a tow truck with its yellow lights flashing. Susan stood next to it, pointing at my car. The tow driver was hooking up the front end. I threw on my coat and ran outside. I asked what they were doing. Susan said my car was parked in violation of the snow emergency route and the HOA had authorized an immediate tow. I said my car was in my own driveway. She said the driveway apron extended into the emergency route zone, and I had been warned. I said I had received no such warning. She pulled out the folded snow emergency policy sheet again and said it was in Section 9. I said Section 9 did not apply to private driveways. She said the board interpreted it to include aprons. I said that was insane. She said, I am calling management and I am going to be dramatic about it. I turned to the tow driver and said he was towing a car from private property without my consent. He said he had a work order from the HOA. I said the HOA did not have authority to tow from private property. He said he was just doing his job. I said I would pay him right now to unhook the car and leave. He hesitated. Susan stepped between us and said the work order was binding, and if he did not complete the tow, she would file a complaint with his company. I said I had proof the work order was fraudulent. She laughed and said I was stalling. I said I would show him the proof. The driver looked between us, then said he would give me 2 minutes. I ran inside, grabbed my binder, and brought it back out. I showed the driver the covenant section that defined emergency routes. It explicitly excluded private driveways and aprons. Then I showed him the group chat screenshots where Susan had admitted the board was targeting my address. Then I showed him the metadata report Jenna had prepared, proving the emergency policy had been created before the storm and deployed selectively. The driver read it all. He looked at Susan. He said this does not look right. Susan said he was not a lawyer and had no business interpreting HOA rules. He said he was not towing a car based on rules that did not match the paperwork. Susan said she would have his contract pulled. He said good luck and started unhooking my car. Susan screamed that he was violating the work order. He said the work order was invalid and if she wanted to argue about it, she could call his boss. Then he got in his truck and drove off, leaving my car in the driveway and Susan standing in the snow with her printer shaking in her hands. She turned to me and said this was not over. I nodded like I was losing, because I wanted her to get comfortable. She said I would regret making this personal. I said it was already personal and she made it that way 3 weeks ago when she posted about me in the group chat. Her face went pale. She said I had no right to access private group communications. I said the group was not private and I was a member. She said she would have me removed. I said that would just be more evidence of retaliation. She folded the policy sheet with a vicious crease and walked off, leaving the cones scattered in the slush. I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything. I wrote a detailed incident report with photos, timestamps, and witness statements. I sent it to the management company with a demand for an immediate hearing. Then I sent a copy to the County Code Enforcement Office and flagged it as potential fraud and harassment. Within 2 hours, I got a call from the management company. They said they were escalating my case and scheduling an emergency board meeting for that evening at the clubhouse. I said I would be there. The rep said Susan would be there too. I said good. The meeting started at 7. The clubhouse was cold and smelled like damp carpet. Susan sat at the head of the table with 3 other board members. I sat across from them with my binder. The management company rep sat at the end and opened with a summary of the complaints. Susan interrupted and said I had a history of non-compliance and antagonistic behavior. I said that was false, and I had evidence of systematic targeting. She said I was paranoid. I said I had screenshots. She said screenshots could be faked. I said the metadata was verified by an IT professional. She said that did not matter because the board had discretion. I said discretion did not mean they could ignore their own covenants. She said the covenants were subject to board interpretation. I said interpretation did not mean fabrication. The rep raised a hand and said we needed to stay on topic. Susan pulled out a stack of printed notices and said I had violated the snow policy 6 times in 4 days. I said the policy was selectively enforced and created after the storm was already forecast. She said timing was irrelevant. I said timing was the whole point. I opened my binder and showed the rep the metadata report. I explained that the emergency policy attachments were created 2 weeks before the storm and deployed the moment the snow started, with no advance notice and no public vote. The rep read the report. One of the other board members said that did not prove anything. I said it proved premeditation. Susan said I was making accusations without evidence. I turned to the page with the group chat screenshots and read her post aloud. She called me a compliance risk and said the board had already flagged my address for prioritized enforcement. The room went silent. Susan said that post was taken out of context. I said the context was clear. She said the group chat was a private communication channel and I had no right to use it as evidence. I said the group was listed as a public neighborhood forum and I was a member in good standing. She said she would have me removed. I said that would be the 3rd time she threatened retaliation in a public setting. The rep looked at her and asked if she had more to say. She said she wanted to move on. I said I was not done. I turned to the invoice section of my binder and showed the rep a series of payments the HOA had made to the snow removal contractor. Every invoice was dated after the storm, but the work orders were dated 2 weeks earlier, the same day the policy attachments were created. The amounts were inflated and included line items for enforcement support, which was not a standard snow removal service. The rep asked where I got the invoices. I said I filed a public records request with the county, and the HOA was required to submit vendor contracts for any work over $5,000. The total for the snow contractor was $12,000. Susan said the invoices were confidential. I said they were public record. She said I was misinterpreting the line items. I said enforcement support meant the contractor was being paid to help the board target residents. The rep asked if that was true. Susan said it was a standard coordination fee. I said coordination did not cost $3,000. The rep said they would need to audit the contract. Susan said there was no need for an audit. I said there was every need because the contract violated the covenants and the HOA was using resident fees to fund selective enforcement. One of the other board members asked if I had more evidence. I said I had one more thing. I pulled out my phone and opened a screenshot. It was a text exchange between Susan and the snow contractor, time-stamped 3 days before the storm. Susan asked the contractor if they could expedite enforcement actions on flagged addresses. The contractor replied yes and quoted a price. Susan replied with my address and 2 others. Then she wrote, Priority 1, maximum disruption. Bill it as emergency response. I held up the phone so everyone could see it. I said this was a text message from Susan coordinating paid harassment. The rep asked how I got it. I said a whistleblower on the contractor crew forwarded it to me anonymously after they realized what was happening. Susan said it was fake. I said the metadata was verified and I had the original message file. The rep said they would need to see it. I said I already sent it to the county code enforcement office and I would forward it to the management company tonight. Susan said I had no proof the number was hers. I said the number was listed on every HOA contact sheet, and she had used it to send me 3 violation notices. She said that did not prove anything. I said it proved everything. The rep closed their folder and said the meeting was over. They would suspend all pending enforcement actions against me pending a full audit of the snow contractor relationship and a review of the group chat posts. Susan said that was an overreach. The rep said it was their decision. Susan said she would appeal. The rep said she could try. Then the rep said the board needed to vote on whether to retain Susan as Neighborhood Watch liaison. One of the other board members said they should table that vote. The rep said they could not table it because the complaint was now a matter of public record and the management company had a duty to act. Susan said she wanted to make a motion. The board president said she could make a motion. Susan said she moved to dismiss my complaint as unfounded. The president said they needed to vote. 2 board members voted yes. 1 voted no. The president abstained. The motion failed. Susan tried to storm out. The board president said she needed to stay for the vote on her position. Susan said she was not going to sit there and be humiliated. The president said then she was resigning. Susan said she was not resigning. The president said then sit down and wait. Someone asked for her motion on record. Susan sat down. The board voted to remove her as liaison. The vote was 3-1 with 1 abstention. Susan said it was a witch hunt. The rep said it was accountability. Susan said she would file a lawsuit. I said I would countersue for harassment and fraud. The rep said everyone should take a breath and let the audit finish. Susan grabbed her printer and her folded policy sheet and left. The room stayed quiet for a long time after she was gone. 2 days later, the County Code Enforcement Office called me. They said they had reviewed my complaint and the evidence I provided. They found multiple violations of the HOA covenants, including improper vendor payments, selective enforcement, and harassment. They issued a formal correction order requiring the HOA to refund all fines and fees related to the snow emergency policy, void all pending liens, and submit to a third-party audit of the snow contractor relationship. The officer said they were also referring the case to the state attorney for potential fraud charges against Susan and the contractor. I asked what that meant for me. The officer said it meant I was in the clear and the HOA could not take any further action without risking criminal liability. I thanked them and hung up. That afternoon, the HOA sent a correction email retracting the smear. It was a single paragraph, posted to the group chat and sent to every resident. It said the board had reviewed the winter enforcement actions and determined that several notices were issued in error. All related fines and fees would be refunded within 30 days. Residents with pending complaints could contact the management company for resolution. There was no apology and no mention of Susan, but everyone knew what it meant. The comments under the post were a mix of relief and anger. One resident said they had been fined twice for the same pile. Another said the contractor had damaged their mailbox and the HOA refused to pay for repairs. A third said they were glad someone finally stood up to the board. I did not comment. I just saved the email and added it to my binder. A week later, I got a letter from the management company. It said Susan's complaint against me had been ruled unfounded, with evidence cited. The board had voted to terminate her role as liaison and suspend her voting privileges pending the outcome of the state investigation. The letter also said the snow contractor relationship had been terminated and the board was seeking bids from new vendors with transparent pricing and no enforcement clauses. I filed the letter and moved on. The final confrontation happened at the clubhouse parking lot 3 weeks later. I was leaving a regular board meeting when Susan appeared near the entrance. She said I had ruined her reputation and cost her thousands in legal fees. I said she did that to herself. She said I was a vindictive liar. I said I had proof of everything. She pulled out the folded snow emergency policy sheet one last time and said the policy was legitimate and I had twisted the facts. I said the policy was a pretext for harassment and the county agreed. She said the county was wrong. I said the state attorney disagreed. She said she was going to fight this. I said she was welcome to try. Then I got in my car and drove home. A month later, the state attorney filed charges. Susan and the contractor were both indicted on fraud and conspiracy charges related to the kickback scheme. The HOA settled with the affected residents for a total of $40,000, paid out of a reserve fund. Susan resigned from the board and moved out of Heritage Ridge 2 months later. The new board implemented a transparent vendor policy and banned emergency enforcement actions without a public vote. I kept my binder in a desk drawer, just in case. The snow melted by mid-March. The streets went back to normal. The board held a public meeting to apologize for the winter enforcement chaos and promised reforms. A few residents clapped. Most just looked tired. I sat in the back and listened. When the meeting ended, one of the new board members stopped me on the way out and said they appreciated what I did. I said I just wanted to shovel my driveway. They said it was more than that. I said maybe. Then I went home and deleted the group chat app from my phone. I did not need it anymore. I still see the tow driver around town sometimes. He waves. I wave back. We never talk about it, but I think he knows. The contractor lost their county certification and went out of business. The management company hired a new rep who actually returns calls. The neighborhood is quieter now. The new board does not weaponize the covenants. People shovel their driveways and mind their own business. It is almost boring. But every time I see an orange cone in the street, I remember Susan waving that tape measure and screaming about snow piles. I remember the thermal printer and the folded policy sheet. I remember the night I stayed up until 3 in the morning building a case because I knew if I did not fight back, I would lose everything. And I remember the tow driver unhooking my car and driving away, leaving Susan standing in the snow with nothing but her own rules to choke on. I learned something that winter. HOA boards count on you staying quiet. They count on you being too tired, too scared, or too broke to fight back. They count on you giving up. But if you document everything, stay calm, and find the receipts, you can turn their own paperwork into a wrecking ball. It just takes patience and a very tight grip on your pen. The neighborhood still talks about it sometimes. New residents ask what happened with the snow fiasco. Old residents say it is a long story. I just say I shoveled my driveway and someone did not like it. That is close enough to the truth. The rest is in the binder, and the binder stays closed unless I need it again. So far, I have not needed it. The new board learned their lesson. If they ever forget, I know where the receipts are. I will see you in the next upload.